Let's go ahead and begin. Thanks for everybody joining us both in person and online for taking the time out of your schedules to attend this seminar. This is the third session in the Easter term seminars of the Martin Center Research Seminar Series, and it's the 52nd edition of this seminar series, which is to say we've been running for 52 years, making it among the longest running series in the field. I think we're very proud of. We've hosted many great names across these years and are pleased to add to that today Kate Macintosh, MBE. I'll make a very brief introduction, and then Kate will present to us today on the topic of public architecture before the market became a deity. And before I go into the introduction, just a note about the format of this seminar. Kate will present for 45 minutes to an hour on some of her projects and her thinking, and then we'll have another 15 to 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. That will be between our in-person audience and our online audience as well. And I'll discuss the details for those online about how you can pose your questions when we get to that point of the presentation. So that being said, Kate Macintosh studied at the Edinburgh Art College. She worked with Southwark Borough Architects on the 1965 Dawson's Height 296 dwelling unit development near Dulwich. She also worked with Lambeth Borough Architects on the 1969 sheltered housing scheme at 269 Layham Court Road in Macintosh Court. This building was listed as grade 2 in 2015. And she also worked with East Sussex County Architects from 1974 as team leader for the design of fire service, education, and social services, as well as with Hampshire County Architects from 1986, headed then by Sir Colin Stanfield Smith on the design of fire service and education products. In 1995, Kate established a private practice as Finch Macintosh Architects, which completed the Weston Adventure Playground in Southampton for a playground charity, and this project earned the RIBA Award in 2005. In 1972, Kate was elected to the RIBA Council and then elected as Vice President for Public Affairs in 1996. She is also the founding chair of the RIBA's Women in Architecture group. So Kate has a very rich history, but I'm sure we'll get to see much more of that through her presentation. So that being said, Kate, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Well, this talk's going to be, as you'll gather from the title, necessarily retrospective, and it goes back quite a long way. Though I've seen so many dramatic changes during my career that the world architects are entering now is almost unrecognizable in comparison. To give you a flavor of the sort of, can we have the first slide up, please? The ethos when I entered the profession, I'll give you a quote from Robert Matthew, who I'm sure you know was the chief architect for the LCC post-war during the 1960s, which was at that time had the largest architect's office in the entire world. And in 1965, speaking as president of the International Union of Architects at their Congress, he said, "We as architects are dedicated not to self-interest, but to the urgent improvement of man's physical state. We have our own vision of the good society." So architects at that time saw themselves almost as a political force, whereas in dialogue with government, and were not just a minor adjunct to the construction industry. And this was the dominant ethos in the post-war era, which established Narendra Bevan as joint minister for health and housing. And he sought to ensure that everyone had access to decent and affordable homes, in pursuit of which he removed the criteria of working class from local authority housing provision and replaced it with the concept of general need. So it wasn't to be just for the most needy. It wasn't to be housing of last resort. And it was my great good fortune to return from Scandinavia in 1964 when Les 30 Glorieuses, as the French have dubbed it, were at their zenith. And you'll see here on this graph that during those 30 years, the green at the top being housing commissioned either through their own in-house architects or through private practice by local authorities, was 50% of the housing output during those years until the clampdown, which came from Thatcher. And this was a consensus, a political consensus that held across Europe. The governments had a duty to ensure the provision of the three necessities for a decent life, namely secure shelter, education, and healthcare for all. And housing was rightly seen as central to attacking the four giant evils identified by Beveridge. And it was this ethos that attracted nearly 50% of the architectural profession to work in the public sector. That has now shrunk to roughly 7%. All of this framework of progressive protection has been picked apart since 1979 and the introduction of right to buy. 50% of homes sold under that heavily subsidized scheme are now owned by buy-to-let landlords, with tenants paying more than twice as much in rent, in some cases 40% of their income. And we have become a nation of rentiers, a housing market with an economy attached. But in 1974, next slide, all that regression was not imaginable by the young and optimistic, of whom I was one. After a stimulating year as the most junior member of the National Theatre team in Dennis Lasdon's office, I considered it's time to get myself more responsibility and practical experience. The London boroughs were newly empowered with prime responsibility for housing in London by the Macmillan government and were under pressure to meet housing targets. Having joined the London Borough of Southwark, I was presented with this phenomenal site in the south of London near Dulwich, which was known as Dawson's Hill. And it was a real challenge as it had stunning views to the north, to the city, and the former docklands as they were then. You could see the cranes, and to the south across Crystal Palace and the North Downs and far into the Surrey Weald. And I wanted to exploit this rare advantage to the maximum. A major constraint was the extremely unstable ground conditions, next slide, which meant that the foundations needed to be very deep and expensive driven piles. So there's almost as much structure below ground as there is above, as you see in this. And the complexity of the foundations seemed to argue for a restricted footprint to the building. My solution was this pair of interlocking stepped ziggurats, varying in height from 12 to 3 stories, the tail of each turning to enclose a communal, car-free, open space, safe and well supervised by overlooking dwellings, though open for the enjoyment of the surrounding community. A critique was gaining traction within the profession at that time of the visual anonymity, as it was seen, of many of the very large blocks of flats put up by local authorities. And we wanted to express the separate family dwelling within the unified totality. Lasdon's Keeling House in the East London is one response to that urging, and Lillington Gardens on Vauxhall Bridge Road, which I very much admired at the time I was designing this, by Darbourne and Dark was another such. The publication was under the title Family and Kinship in East London. It was published in 1957 by Wilmot and Young. The reduction in scale of the ziggurats towards the extremities and the staggering of the high points differs to the surrounding scale and minimizes the blocking of sun and view. Next slide. Originally, there were pedestrian bridges linking the lowest of the access decks from the lowest part of the building through to the high point where a lift was available. And these bridges served two purposes. One was to emphasize and increase the sense of enclosure within the central space. And the other was to give all residents, no matter which part of the complex they lived in, the shortest possible route to a lift if they were carrying some heavy object. Next slide, please. I organized the varying maisonettes, which are, as you see, split level and double dual aspect, so that three different sizes shared a common access way to ensure that larger and smaller families would be neighbors and hopefully assist in the social mixing. You'll see here that you get a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and a 3-bedroom, all sharing an access way. This is diagrammatic interlocking elevation here. And in the section, you'll see that the parking is tucked away half a level down from the lowest habitable floor. Next slide. All dwellings are to Parker Morris space standards, which was brought in under the Macmillan government, and all the living rooms, except for the flipped around tails, are facing south, and they all have at least one balcony, some have two. In all cases, the living room is half a flight distant from the front door. Next slide. The central conundrum of housing design, in my view, is to strike the balance between conviviality and privacy, and the spaces that architects try to provide to encourage conviviality are precisely those that Alice Coleman, who was the chief housing advisor to Thatcher, condemned as encouraging, if indeed not causing, crime. And I think it was under this ideology that the pedestrian bridges were removed, which I regret. Next slide, please. The stockade play sculptures here that you see in these little mounds was my idea at the time of adventure playgrounds. These have now been swept away and replaced with rather more conventional play equipment. Next slide. However, despite the removal of the bridges, the central open space does indeed serve as a hub and a place of social conviviality, despite the fact that the tenures are now diverse. And as you see here, there's a great diversity in ethnicity as well. Next slide. These social events are put on during the summertime, and I've attended two myself, together with my granddaughter, who had great fun in this bouncy structure here. So the social glue seems to be working quite well. Next slide. One good thing that the Housing Association, which took over from Southwark at some stage during the Thatcher era, when she was presenting all sorts of inducements for local authority tenants to vote for that, they declared the lowest part of the hill, which was universally regarded as economically totally unbuildable, as a nature reserve. And so this is now a public open space where all and sundry can go, and it's an excellent place to go and watch the fireworks on November the 5th or any other public celebration. Next slide. Now in 19 1968, I moved from Southwark to Lambeth, where I was presented with the brief for a much more modest scale of development. This is 44 flats for sheltered flats for the elderly, together with a common room and communal laundry. Originally, there was a living-in warden who had a first floor flat here and various other facilities. So in the orientation here is of the site is east-west. Is a former garden to what had been quite a large Edwardian villa, and so the site is well treed. I wanted at all costs to avoid any atmosphere of institution, and so I designed the accommodation as a series of cluster blocks. There are 5 near identical cluster blocks which are linked by this covered way through to the communal accommodation, which is on the street frontage. The warden's office is here beside the common room, so that she or he can monitor the comings and goings of the residents. The accommodation was 2-person and 1-person flats in a ratio of 3:1, which enabled me to create these quite generous roof terraces at first floor level. Next slide. The covered way is not completely linear, but does a joggle to every point where it intersects with the entrance, the communal entrance to one of the cluster blocks. And at that point, next slide, it doubles in width. The point being that if a resident happens to meet a neighbor and want to linger for a chat at their entrance, they can do so quite comfortably without obstructing the passage of other residents who may be wishing to head for the common room. Next slide. This communal lobby here is naturally lit with ley lights to north and south, and the threshold condition is slightly more generous than minimal to allow for some personalization if people wish to do that. Next slide. The verdure of the gardens was very much appreciated by the residents, not just for themselves, but if grandchildren in particular come to visit, there's plenty of opportunity for them to run around and play without annoying other residents who may be trying to take a nap. And I set out the buildings from the trees to ensure that no single tree had to be taken down. This shot was taken shortly after handover. Next slide, please. And the private or semi-private open spaces are also very well used and very well appreciated, as you see here. The first floor level there, completely private. At ground floor level, they're semi-private because of the setbacks. So after moving out of London to the counties, I'd rather lost touch with my London work, and was surprised to get a phone call in 2013 from the daughter of one of the residents seeking my advice because her mother, together with all the other residents, had received a notification from Lambeth of their intention to move all the tenants out. They couldn't give them any indication where they would be moved to, and certainly no guarantee that they would be kept together, because Lambeth wanted to demolish the whole scheme and sell off the land. And the residents on the whole were extremely resistant to this and felt it was a betrayal of trust, that they had all signed up to their leases in the expectation that this was where they were going to finish their days. So my advice was, there was only one route that would give any security, and that was to go for listing. So together with the help of Docomomo, an exceedingly knowledgeable and expert organization, an application for listing was drawn up and submitted to Historic England. And my son organized an online petition, which received considerable support from quite a few prestigious names, including past presidents of the RIBA. And to, I admit, my considerable surprise and delight, in 2015, next slide please, we heard that the application had been successful and it was listed grade 2. So here we are celebrating. There was an open gardens day organized by Architects for Social Housing, and one of the residents, this lady you see here on the right, applied to Lambeth to get my name incorporated in the name for the complex, which was very complimentary. Our delight was unbounded, and even more so since a few weeks later we heard that Lambeth had voted to spend up to £1.5 million on catching up with the neglect of maintenance, which had persisted over a period of over 40 years. What could possibly go wrong? We all heaved a sigh of relief. Next slide. However, in the case of Lambeth, it turns out quite a lot can go wrong. In 2018, I got another call from a resident begging me to come down and have a look at the dreadful things that were going on. And what was my dismay when this was the sort of thing that met my eyes. Originally, all these service distribution pipes were located in underground ducts, and I have never had any cogent explanation as to why the services were not rerun in their original position. So pretty much everything you see here in the way of pipes and brackets is illegal, that is to say, criminally illegal. However, there is an anomaly within the protection of listed buildings system, in that if it were listed grade 1, it would be within the powers of Historic England to intervene and issue an enforcement notice. But the assumption is, if it is grade 2, that the local planning authority, in the shape of their conservation officer, will take that responsibility. However, if the owner of the building and the perpetrator of the abuse is that very same authority as has the planning power, that enforcement notice is highly unlikely to be issued. And this is the case we have here. So we've had, not only is this pipework illegal, but it is technically a disaster, since the breakdown in services occur at least every 2 months. And during the Christmas and New Year break just passed, the poor residents were subject to a complete outage of heating and hot water for 2 solid weeks. So it's not just an aesthetic matter, it's a matter of abuse of their duty of care. We've had 3 public apologies and 2 expert reports, but to date, so far as I'm aware, no effective action has been taken to rectify matters. 2 years, more than 2 years after practical completion. A group of residents has taken legal action against Lambeth with the help of an altruistic legal firm, and in October 2021, they won an out-of-court settlement against the local authority, including a requirement that Lambeth repair all the leaking roofs and ensure heating and hot water services were working. But this does nothing to address the breaches of the listed protection. Lambeth Council is now as eager as central government to erase the legacy of the Beveridge post-war dispensation. There are 6 estates now in line of fire for demolition, including Cressingham Gardens and Central Hill by Rosemary Schoenstedt, both of which schemes I'm not alone in considering should have been listed, though if it was only grade 2, it would offer them little protection, as you see here. Lambeth is only an extreme example of a culture of asset stripping in common with many public bodies under the doctrine of shrink the state. The history of this vandalism inflicted on a listed building reflects in a microcosm what is going on all the hot property hotspots across London and other cities, all in accordance with the advice of Lord Adonis, that developers should seek their major opportunities in the housing schemes of local authorities. The next slide, please. Of course, the urge to completely demolish and rebuild rather than going for retrofit, which is what from the point of view of sustainability is required, is in very large measure driven by the asymmetrical application of VAT at 20% to retrofit, whereas new build housing is 0 rated for VAT. And this is an incentive that needs to be removed. These tables and the map you see before you is from a local government financial report, which illustrates how there has been an average of reduction of 60% in core government funding to local governments during the 10 years preceding 2020. That is the average, is a 60% reduction, but the map on the right-hand side shows that this is not equally applied across the country, but applied with greater rigor generally in those areas which are in greater need. The dark brown is the where the penalty is most heavily applied, and the lighter areas are where the penalty is more lenient. So you see that there's quite a considerable political bias to this. So local governments are acting as useful decoys, deflecting anger from central government, who can delegate the blame for failure to deliver services while withholding the necessary means for such delivery. Since 1979, 50% of public land holdings have been privatized under the doctrine of shrink the state. And all public bodies, from the Forestry Commission through to the Ministry of Defence and, of course, local government, have been obliged to prepare yearly audits of their land and property holdings, together with justifications for the need for such holdings. And no such onus is placed on the private sector. 9.3 billion is paid out per annum to private landlords in housing benefit. Next slide, please. This slide is now vastly out of date. However, I don't suppose that the general relationship has changed much. This shows housing benefit as a percentage of GDP within the UK compared with other European countries. UK is the top line in blue here at the top, and below that you have France, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, and at the very bottom is Germany, because Germany has taken steps to enforce some control on the private rented sector. So the state-sponsored gentrification masquerading under the slogan of regeneration has resulted in a 27% reduction in homes for social rent, despite increases in density. But the theory of asset-based welfare reliant on right to buy housing means this approach cannot be replicated by subsequent generations. As with right to buy itself, this model is something of a one-time only offer, one that benefits a certain age while barring those following them from accessing stable housing. Between 1946 and 1979, 50% of homes built, as we saw in the very first graph, were commissioned by local authorities. Between 79 and 2020, this dropped to 5%. And less than 5% of those homes sold have ever been replaced. Conversions known as permitted development, conversions of factories and warehouses without going through any planning procedure, these generally are falling 80% of them below permitted space standards. So they certainly will be the slums of the future. And it's the way that right to buy interacts with buy to let and housing benefit that began to push rents up to unaffordable levels, creating the stream of evictions and poor conditions that characterize social housing today, as housing benefit no longer covers soaring rents, which have risen 8.6% in the last year. According to government figures, there were over 42,000 families living in temporary accommodation in London as of October last year. So I'm going to return now to a sunnier retrospective view of my career, having thoroughly depressed you. Next slide, please. And this is but a small selection of the work that I did after leaving London that I'm going to show you. This is not one by me, but I'm showing this because when we quit London in '74, we had already bought in '71 a small and at that time very derelict property in a Tuscan village as an escape valve. And the campanile in the very simple but perfectly proportioned Tuscan Romanesque style that you see in and around Lucca, where this is, struck it in my memory as a wonderful creation. So next slide, please. When I joined the county of East Sussex, the first project I was presented with was a fire station in Hastings, a building type for which I was totally unfamiliar. And I was, this is on the Folkestone Road to the north of Hastings. Next slide. Very much in sympathy with the values of Kevin Lynch in his book, The Image of the City, that landmarks are very much of great importance in giving legibility and structure and identity to places. So when every fire station, of course, has to have a drill tower, and it's not often that architects these days get a chance to build a tower. I'm setting aside the gross overblown variety that you see in the City of London. So I determined that my drill tower would be a little more interesting than the absolute minimal standard functional tower that the regulations require. Next slide. The aesthetic problem of fire stations, which I set myself out to solve, is one of how to unify two disparate scales. You have what is normally fetches up as a two-story quasi-domestic and administrative building, and jammed up against that is often a totally other foreign body, 1.5 story normal height industrial shed, which is the big garage for the appliances. So my solution to this problem in this case was to wrap the whole thing down to the somewhere between first floor and door height level with an envelope of zinc, zinc being a fairly robust material, which also happens to react quite favorably to a saline climate. Next slide. The next job I had for the fire brigade in East Sussex was in deepest rural Sussex. This is near a little village called Maresfield. This is a fire brigade training headquarters. So you see that the fire drill tower is 7 stories rather than the standard 5. And in order to not offend the sensibilities of walkers in this lovely rural setting, I did my best to make the drill tower be sited as discreetly as possible, adjacent to the largest tree on the site, which is this magnificent oak here you see on the left. Below the drill tower is what's known as a firehouse, where the poor recruits are put through absolute purgatory, in that they are forced to stumble around in an atmosphere of maximum humidity, the highest temperature the human body can stand, and it's all smoke logged, of course. And this is all within a maze of obstacles which are constantly being changed around, so that they can't memorize how it is every time. It's a new route that they have to find. And if they should panic and whip off their breathing apparatus, there's a control room down here where the whole thing is being monitored, and they bang on the fans, exhaust the smoke, and go in and rescue the poor collapsed recruit before they die of suffocation. So the whole of the drill tower can be smoke logged as well, because there are shutters over all these apertures. Next slide. So doing this job gave me the utmost respect for and indeed admiration for the fire brigade, and if they get through all that training, they're going to be pretty brave people. The base of the drill tower is this little pavilion here, which is it's got the showers, locker room, administration, interview room, lecture room, there where they taught about the chemicals of various different fires and what to apply in any given place case. Next slide. And this was my last building for East Sussex Fire Brigade. This drill tower is not by me because this building, which is a communications headquarters, where they take all the fire calls coming in and send out a message to whichever fire station is the nearest adjacent, with an estimate of how many appliances will be needed. This is on the banks of the River Ouse in front of the pre-existing Lewes fire station. And at that time, computers were about 100 times bigger than they are now, and very, very expensive. The cost of the computer equipment is way in excess of the value of the building. So that all had to be treated with great respect. And in that this site is prone to flooding, as you would deduce by the concrete wall here, it was very important that the computer hardware, sorry, I've dropped my mouse, was located where it was not going to get flooded out. So I found out what was the highest recorded flood level and located that floor 600 millimeters above the highest recorded flood plain. The window into the roof that you see there, that is where the constant monitoring is going on, where they receive the calls and send out the messages. And the floor below that is the washrooms and dormitories and offices for, it's 24/7 manned, of course. So next slide, please. And this is now moving to Hampshire, where I changed course in 86. And this is the largest fire station I've designed, which was a 5-bay station with the possibility of extending to 6 bays, because it's on the edge of Farnborough airfield, where, as you know, they have an air show every year, and it was deemed possibly to be, there might be a call out for a major incident. Next slide. So once again, I was preoccupied with how to unify the different scales. And this time I resorted also to expressing the structure and having the family of structures of a similar design, with 2 pairs of lattice girders going straight across, which in the case of the appliance bay means that the covered wash at the rear of the garages is cantilevered, and there's no columns that a tired driver might crash into on returning from a call out. And then there are cantilevers coming off those main trusses, and a similar language for the residential stroke administrative building. Next slide. So here you see the newly finished facade onto the street, where you can see the ground floor of the two-story part. There were offices at that time for fire prevention control, which the fire brigades across the country offered for free, mainly to architects, of course. And all of that facility was withdrawn under Thatcher and the burning of the regulations, which has led, I'm sure, to some very real fires. And the upper floor of the two-story part is all steel framed, which means so there can be some flexibility in moving accommodation around, which might be necessary since they're now recruiting women to be firefighters, which would mean they need an additional dormitory. Next slide. I decided to celebrate the pole drop, which is at the center of the cruciform structure, and that descends into the so-called muster bay, where the kits for retained firemen are located, and the firemen then shoot out into the appliance bay, and off they go. They pride themselves on a 3-minute turnout from sleeping rest to being on the road, and I thoroughly believe that they achieve that. Next slide. Here you see the comparison of the two gables. The one on the right, on the ground floor, is the common room, which is where they socialize and relax, coming back from firefighting. And that process of socializing and building trust is really essential in a very, very dangerous occupation like firefighting. So it's an essential part of their routine. Above that is the lecture theatre, and to the left and right, the gables enclose the dormitories, as I already explained. Next slide. And here you see the comparison of the three drill towers that I had such fun designing. On the left is the one in Hastings of Halton Tower. The middle is Maresfield, the 7-story tower, and on the right is Rushmore, adjacent to the Farnborough airfield. Next slide. Now going to move to a very different client. This is an infant school in Hampshire, Portsmouth, which is located above what was a Victorian reservoir, which was located on rising ground, and therefore the north is up the image, the plan here, and below the building, going down to the road, is a steep bank, above which the ground is plateaued by this what was ovular in shape, this Victorian reservoir. And it's a 3-form entry school, so you see that the classrooms are in groups of 3. The playground is at the rear, and the children enter the school from the playground into the corridors, which along which are the toilets, which they can also access, of course, if they're taken short in playtime. And the lettable accommodation is to the left of the plan, which is, of course, the assembly hall, which doubles up as a dining facility with its kitchen, and music and drama suite, and the corridor which then feeds into that space can be locked off so that only that those communal facilities are accessible to those members of the public who are using it. Next slide. This is the school seen from the playground. You see that there is a continuous dormer which is to the north, illuminating the back of the each classroom, so they can get a good cross ventilation in hot weather. And I'm assured that there's never been any overheating in this school. And where the joggle occurs in the plan, the two dormers overlap and you get double illumination. The high block on the right hand side of the image, that of course is the assembly room, and the only two accommodation at first floor level is the staff room, which is accessed off this single flight stair with the narrow slot windows so that they can see out into the playground but feel quite secluded from the hurly-burly of dealing with the children, which is what they need to escape from time to time. Next slide. And here you see the two entrances. Because the site, the building is constructed over infill, the foundations are short bore piles. So for very little additional expense, I could put in this jetting out of a teaching deck, and the children actually generally enter the school in an underpass below the school, rising up steps the other side. And the head's office is in that location, bridging across the children's entrance, and she can get out onto this teaching deck. So if she hears a hullabaloo going on, she can get out there and remonstrate with them and find out what's going on. The right-hand slide shows the official entrance where teachers and parents would normally enter, and indeed governors. And this is monitored by the secretary, whose office is just off shot to the right here. The very large window is, of course, into the hall, and the wraparound window, that's into the music and drama suite. Next slide. And the right-hand slide here shows the teaching deck, all timber, so children, there's no rough surfaces for them to abrade against. And this on the left-hand side is the west gable of the school. So it's one of my preoccupations, is especially when dealing with children, try to make the structure and construction of the building as legible as possible, so the building itself can become a teaching tool for any aspiring infants who might get interested in architecture. Right, next slide. The left-hand slide here is, of course, the interior of the assembly room, and the high-level window you see in the top left-hand corner, that is going into the staff room, so that the member of staff who's doing some marking or prep can look into the hall and see what's going on. And the large window, of course, looking towards the docks, and the ferries going to the Isle of Wight. The right-hand slide shows the point of intersection where the joggle occurs and the double north light, which at which point the corridor doubles in width, and you get what they call the central resource, which in Old English is the library. So as the children walk around the school, they are always aware of the location of the library and the facilities that it offers. Next slide. Now, a very different, but also an education project. This is this piece of Renian Baroque dating from 1903 is a former girls' grammar school in Fratton, Portsmouth, which is now a comprehensive. And I was given the brief to add a sports hall onto the street frontage, just alongside this rather stupendous exuberance here. Next slide. Clearly, to put in your sealed black box in this situation would be highly inappropriate. This facility is actually a multi-purpose hall. It's used for exams, and it's also public let for whatever purposes the people want to put on, provided they don't wear stiletto heels, which would ruin the floor. The scale diminishes to the left here. Is a conservation area in the adjoining street where there's a rather charming row of Victorian terraced houses. So that's the music suite is in there. And in Hampshire, we always try to make a contribution to the public realm so that there would be some interest in the street scene. Next slide. So the exterior brick is a terracotta semi-engineering brick. Internally, it's also a semi-engineering brick, but in buff. And I was concerned to give some human scale to this, I'm sure for an 11-year-old entering the school from primary level could be a fairly daunting size of space. So I opted for these semi-engaged cylindrical columns, and the structural engineers were Anthony Hunt, who I think did an excellent job. There was some nail-biting time watching the cranes lowering these delicate trusses onto the top of the columns, but it all went off very well. The end gables, because of the height of the walls, are diaphragm walls, and because of that thickness allowed the depth for a baffled reveal within which the shutters protecting the glass of the lower part of this large window can be recessed and folded out as required when there are ball games going on. The windows, arched windows you see at first floor level on the left, they are a viewing gallery off a corridor where parents can come and watch a match if there's a competition going on with another school. And on the right-hand side at ground level, in the side aisle, as it were, is a fitness suite. Next slide. The overall area of the site for this school, which has a roll of 1,200, did at that time, it may be more now, was to try to create some places of repose in the outdoor spaces around the buildings. And my answer to that was to create this sunken garden with a pool, which the head of the art department told me that later they also use for art classes, which was rather gratifying to me. The ventilation of the hall is a very slow rotating large fan, which is in that large lantern placed in the center of the roof there. That doesn't interfere with the flight of the shuttlecocks. I'm now, if time permits me, going to tell you, give you a description of Weston Adventure Playground, which, next slide, I moved into private practice with my life partner, George Finch, in 1995. And we got this in competitive interview for a charity funding for an adventure playground. Weston is a suburb of Southampton where there's a high level of deprivation, there's high unemployment, and all other measures of deprivation. The playground was operating at that time out of a series of precast concrete Marley garages, but despite the alienating and extremely ugly accommodation they had, they were in great demand, and the police remarked on the low level of crime in the area, which they put down largely to the operation of this adventure playground. Extremely admirable team of people. So that in many ways, the site was entirely unsuited to a playground, being quite steeply sloping, as you see with the original slope there. So we opted to plateau the site in a series of 3 levels and to raise the building up to a normal first floor level with a bridge across to the main play area. Next slide. By this time, we'd educated ourselves somewhat in the necessity to use more sustainable modes of construction. So we opted for mainly timber building, although there is some steel involved, and the whole of the cladding is in green oak. This was a computer generated image to impress the planners, which I'm glad to say the finished building completely corresponded with. Next slide. Here you see the green oak cladding, which, as you probably know, green oak is about half the price of seasoned oak, and it's also much easier to work. However, you have to be extremely careful in your fixing details because it shrinks very considerably across the grain. And so you have to allow for that movement. We wanted the entire building as far as possible to be an exciting adventure experience and to allow lots of different routes around and through. And this walkway here is very useful for the play leaders. They can get out and get a good view of what's going on across the site. Next slide. Here you see the green oak in greater detail, and you'll see that the split roof section, as with the Solent Infant Schools, allows for cross ventilation in hot weather. And the jettying out that you see serves two purposes. One is to give some weather protection as the punters approach the entrance. Since we've got no rainwater gutters on this roof slope at all, thus avoiding a maintenance problem, especially as it's in a heavily treed area. Next slide. But also the jetting out provides a place of greater repose within the hall, to which the children can retire to do their homework or hone their computer skills on donated tablets given by well-wishers within local business. All of the storage doors, which you see both at low level and at the end of the hall, are covered with pinboard. So if you were to visit it now, you wouldn't see them in that state, but they'd be covered by various bits of artwork by the kids. The lights include sound absorbency to keep the resonance down. Next slide. The insulation is warm cell, which is basically cellulose fiber, and it was fascinating seeing it go in. It's just blown in through a scrim, and the whole place is fetches up looking like a huge eiderdown until you put in the internal finishes. You can see that the environment locally, that this is the tower block is known as Canberra Towers. It's 24 stories high, and unfortunately Portsmouth have been in the habit of dumping some problem families there. However, some well-wishers of the playground also kept an eye on it during the construction process and phoned the play leader if there was any sort of a break-in. Next slide. So the detailing had to be pretty robust to withstand the extremely energetic clientele, but I hope it doesn't come across as brutally so. Anyway, as I say, they have maximum take up for kids wanting to come here, and they accept children of all ages from 3 to 18. So it's quite a stretch for the play leaders. Next slide. And this is my final slide, I think. Yes, this is the cable run in action. So that concludes my presentation. I hope I haven't overrun too much. Any questions?